Kia ora and welcome to the Beer Jerk Beer of the Week drink along. I'm Luke and this week we're drinking a beer from Modus, which is Acid Jaguar. Modus are this is the first time we've had them in as a beer of the week actually. We've imported them a few times, so they're on Sydney's northern beaches in Mona Vale. And yeah, we're fans of their beer. They do some really interesting stuff. I think we've had them in the advent calendars before, and we've done various mixed cases. But if you only shop with us with the Beer of the Week subscription, this may be your first time drinking a Modus beer, because we're the only people that sell them in New Zealand. Modus were formerly known as Modus Operandi and shortened their name recently to the snappy Modus. It was started by a couple called Jazz and Grant. And yeah, they really got a reputation for really big hoppy beers in the early days. They started nearly 10 years ago. And beers like Sonic Prayer that you might have had recently, but some of the early hits were like Former Tenant, which was a really fantastic red IPA. That just hit all the, ticked all the boxes really. And more recently it's been quite interesting seeing the development of the business and the brand into, they've sort of created their own sub-brands. So I'm just gonna have a sip. It's pretty good. I'll get back to that in a moment. So in the early days, well, first of all, they just filled crowlers and did kegs. And then they got these really cool cans, which it's a really smart way to do branding, I suppose. It's just a can that's branded with your brewery. Then these really, really nice looking thin labels. Just as an affordable way to have good looking cans that they can do small batch seasonals. This is a small batch from the Mona Vale brewery. They've recently opened a much bigger brewery, which is about 10 times the size, up the coast in Newcastle, which is a whole huge, big operation. But their small original brewery in Mona Vale is still there, and you can go and visit both of them. So these small batch ones, it means you don't have to go to as much cost. For any of you brewers out there, you know that the major part of the cost with releasing beer in package is, well, it's artwork, it's designing the art, it's having labels printed, but having cans printed is massively expensive, which is why you don't see that many printed cans from small independent breweries in New Zealand especially, because the minimum order quantities are just massive. So this is a really nice way to do it. But more recently, they've had sort of sub-brands. So there's their Naught range that we import a little bit of. That's their alcohol-free range. So they started off with just one beer, but now they've got a whole family of 4 different alcohol-free beers, which are some of the best alcohol-free beers I've tasted. So that's really cool to bring them over and sort of compare and contrast with all this new big movement in alcohol-free beers from New Zealand brewers and, well, everywhere in the world. And they've started a range of, well, not a range, they've started a Mexican corn lager called Cerveza recently, which is just a beautiful, refreshing, really crisp Mexican lager. And that's sort of its whole thing as well. They do a range of seltzers, I think. I haven't had them, we haven't imported them yet. But yeah, it's been interesting seeing, as I say, sort of the development from a scrappy little brewery and a little brew kit to getting bigger and bigger, and I suppose brewing more stuff that is probably a lot more commercially viable than these stupidly expensive to make small batches. But that's what I like drinking. So this beer we've got this week is Acid Jaguar. And it's a really big kettle sour. It's 8%. It's a real big whack of flavour. I'm really enjoying drinking this. It is not overly tart. I think a lot of people have problems with kettle sours in that they can simply be too acidic, and people talk about getting heartburn and sort of like, you know, stomach bile sort of vibes. And some people are really into that, so that's kind of nice. I think when things are divisive, that's good, because not everyone can like everything. But certainly when I drink a kettle sour, I like this to be a bit more balanced between the, you know, the flavour experience and the body of it, rather than it just being one-dimensional acid. So despite being called Acid Jaguar, it's, in my opinion, you may have a different opinion, so please argue with me and let me know in the New Zealand Beer Jerks group on Facebook if you think this is very acidic. But it is what it says in the tin, really. There's loads of raspberry in here, there's loads of lime, which is a really good flavour combination. you've just got, because raspberry is such a sweet, raspberry is the best berry flavour, and then lime just really cuts through it with the acidity. It's just a really, really good one too. It's just a bit of a classic food pairing. And talking of pairings, this would go nicely with food. If you read the Beer of the Week email, I always put a lot of work into the food pairings and thinking about what to pair it with. So I'll put a bit more thought into this before I go and write the email in a minute. Yeah, I think with pairing with beers, it's good to have things that really contrast or things that complement broadly. So this is, I mean, it's not super light bodied just because it's got the booze in there, and just the alcohol gives it sort of a kind of slickness or a bigger body than it would if it was a 4% beer. But it's relatively light bodied and it's tart. There's a real nice just berry tartness that is reminiscent of lime juice, really. So I think it would go well with food that's really fatty, that's sort of the opposite to that acid tartness. So stuff like probably like pork chops on the barbecue, or things like something really creamy, so like a baked camembert would go really nicely with this, I think. Just really cut against it, or probably thinking about grilled stuff as well, just sort of like blackened charcoal type things, or contrary to that, it's often fun to pair beers with things that just really complement it. So probably something like a berry sorbet could be really fun to eat with this beer. So yeah, this is a beer that a few of you are going to hate. We've had a few crowd pleasers recently with good IPAs and pale ales that everyone loves. So I know there will be a few of you out there that are not big fans of sours. So good work for trying it anyway. Hopefully you've got someone to share it with, because this is a big half-litre can of an 8% beer. So if you hate it, yeah, sorry. We did actually have a chap that I think he cancelled his subscription recently because he was complaining that the our cans were too big and we had too many high alcohol beers. So if that is you, sorry about that. But it's pretty good value, I reckon, for $8 a beer to get wonderful beers like this. Anyway, I'm waffling. Kettle sours are made using a kind of, it's the same kind of culture that you have in yogurts. So very simplistically, because I know a lot of you out there are not brewers and probably aren't that bothered about the whole technical side of things. So simplistically, the brewer makes the wort, which is the sugary water that then traditionally you would chuck the yeast into, and then the yeast eat the sugar, break it down, turn it into booze. But there's an extra step when making a kettle sour. So the yeast are not introduced to begin with. This culture is introduced, like the yogurt type culture, which sours the beer. And then they're killed off, and then the yeast is added. So basically, it's the amount of time that you leave the culture in the wort that dictates the final pH as to how sour you want the beer to be. So beers like this are very different to wild ferment sour beers. They're entirely different things, really. So they're beers that you get that are things like Gers, not to be mixed up with Goza, also Lambic. And then you get just this whole world of interesting Belgian foeder beers, barrel-aged beers. You get things like a Flanders Red and Oud Bruin. So they're soured by wild cultures and wild yeasts that just exist in the world. And then you get yeast like Brettanomyces that do interesting things. So when you get those sort of wild ferment beers, the wildness and the funkiness and the sourness really does add an extra layer of flavour to it. But with a kettle sour, it's clean. So it's not that one's better than the other. There are definitely some snobs out there that say that they hate kettle sours because it's cheap and easy, and it kind of is. It's a lot cheaper and a lot easier than putting a beer in an oak barrel for over a year. But it's a different product, and the prices generally do reflect that. So what I like about kettle sours is you get the sort of clarity of expression and clarity of flavour of what the brewer is trying to do. It's not necessarily a collaboration with the wild elements. It's the brewer making the ingredients do exactly what she or he wants them to do. So yeah, you don't get any kind of flavour from the sourness. It just simply is pH with a kettle sour like this. Anyway, I really hope you enjoy it. News from here, so the Fridge and Flagon, which is where I am right now. If you've never been to the Fridge and Flagon, come down. It's my favourite bar in the country. It's pretty fantastic. We have hundreds of different beers to choose from in the fridge that you can drink on site, so you can take away. We always have at least 12 interesting beers on tap from wonderful breweries around New Zealand and a few imports as well. So we are only open on Saturday afternoons, but starting this very Friday, that's tomorrow, we're going to be open on Fridays as well. So come by for an after work drink, bring your colleagues along, and if that goes well, we may open a few more nights. We used to be open for 7 days when we had wonderful Rose, who was our bar manager here, before, pandemics and everything else hit us. So it'd be nice to open a little bit more here at the Fridge and Flagon. So yeah, maybe you'll get a chance to come and join us now that we're also open on Fridays. Anyway, great work, Modus, and great work to you for enjoying this nice sour beer. Cheers.